So let's talk about fighting in the Pacific. During that Atlantic Charter meeting back before the United States even got involved in the war, it was agreed upon that Hitler and the Nazis in Germany were more important. So even after the bombing at Pearl Harbor, the United States focused on the European front. After the defeat of Germany, the United States really began to focus on fighting in the Pacific theater. They had maintained a presence in the Pacific theater, but they really turned their focus after the victory in Europe Day. The Japanese were seen as sort of brutal occupiers, going all the way back to the rape of Nanjing, and the American experience was no different. The most famous example of this is the Bataan Death March, when the Japanese took over the Philippines and there were Americans there. I think something like 20,000 Americans, 60,000 Filipinos are going to be put on this forced march. Many of them died along the way. After Pearl Harbor, though, now that the United States is officially at war with Germany, Italy, and Japan, the United States is going to have to rebuild its Navy in the Pacific because except for the 2 aircraft carriers that were out on maneuvers, the Pacific fleet was largely destroyed. It takes about 6 months for the United States to really build up its power back in that territory. And after the 6-month sort of goes by, the first major victory that the United States has after Pearl Harbor is known as the Battle of the Midway. Midway is an island. It's a little bit off of Hawaii, and it is a turning point in the Pacific. One might call it where the tide turns. So it's a turning point in the Pacific, and after the Battle of Midway, the Japanese are no longer moving towards the United States, and really it's the United States military, the Navy, is starting to push them back towards mainland Japan. And the strategy that they're using is referred to as island hopping. Now, this is not a complicated concept. What the United States military is going to do is bypass the strongly held islands where the Japanese are well fortified, because every assault is going to be an amphibious assault, kind of like what happened at D-Day. So they're going to bypass those strongly held islands and just neutralize them by putting a ship around the island to make sure that the Japanese don't get on or off. So they neutralize them with the Navy. Now, they do need to take some islands, and what they're going to do is try to take the weak islands as they slowly sort of island hop their way towards mainland Japan. Because what they want to do is be able to bomb Japan. So they're going to try to get close enough to Japan to bomb them, and they do get there relatively quickly in the grand scheme of things. And the most important island that they get to is Okinawa. That's a key island. That was a strongly held island. It's going to take a lot for the United States to finally take that island. And from there, and Iwo Jima is also another important island in this battle, they're going to bomb Tokyo and other cities in Japan. The reason that there was very little sympathy for the civilians in Japan was because after the Battle of Midway, the Japanese started using kamikaze fighters, and this is where the Japanese pilots would basically have a suicide run and try to use the planes to hit the ships and destroy the ships that way. So because of the kamikaze attacks, there's very little sympathy for the civilians that were being attacked in these fire bombings. And the fire bombs were incredibly effective. They destroyed vast amounts of territory of civilian cities, especially in Tokyo. 80,000 people are going to die as a result of these. Hundreds of thousands more are going to be homeless. So that's incredibly effective, but still the Japanese did not give up. And it's going to take the use of the atomic bombs before that finally occurs. Harry Truman decided, he looked at the plans, and the assumption was that it would take somewhere in the neighborhood of 250,000 to 500,000 American soldiers' lives in order to take and occupy mainland Japan. Instead, what he decided to do was use atomic weapons to attack Hiroshima. This was the payoff of the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project developed 2 atomic weapons, Fat Man and Little Boy, and they were used first on Hiroshima, or Hiroshima, however you want to say that. And Japan still did not surrender. A few days later, the atomic weapon again was used on Nagasaki, right? And after Nagasaki, Japan was still contemplating whether or not to surrender. The United States threatened to use a third bomb, which they did not have, and the Japanese decided to surrender on August 14th, 1945, which is known as VJ Day, Victory over Japan Day. And World War II is over, and now we are moving into a new tense relationship with the Soviet Union.